They taught you that endurance was loyalty, that silence was respect, that absorbing emotional weight without complaint was proof of character, and for a long time you believed it. You stayed, not because you were weak, but because you were hopeful. You waited for understanding to arrive, for kindness to mature, for fairness to finally speak. But some environments do not evolve, they repeat. And there comes a moment, quiet and unmistakable, when the heart understands what the mouth has been afraid to admit. Staying is no longer noble. This is not a story of anger or rebellion. This is the moment dignity takes its first breath. Not in confrontation, not in revenge, but in the calm, steady decision to walk away with your self-respect intact, your conscience clear, and your peace no longer negotiable. When love becomes a lesson, not a home, there is a quiet awakening that does not arrive with noise or drama. It comes slowly, often after years of endurance, when the heart begins to understand what the mind has long tried to excuse. You grow up believing that family is shelter, that it is the one place where explanation should never be required and worth should never be questioned. You are taught that love is permanent, that blood guarantees safety, that patience will eventually be rewarded with understanding. And so you stay. You adjust. You soften your voice. You shrink your needs. You convince yourself that discomfort is temporary and that loyalty means learning how to survive emotional storms without complaint. But over time, patterns reveal themselves, not in one incident, not in a single harsh moment, but in repetition. The same dismissals wearing different faces, the same expectations without acknowledgement, the same subtle messages that tell you your feelings are inconvenient, your boundaries unnecessary, your presence valuable only when it serves a role. Love, in such spaces, becomes conditional, granted when you comply, withdrawn when you assert yourself. And slowly, almost invisibly, home stops feeling like rest. It becomes a classroom where pain teaches lessons you never asked to learn. This is the moment when love changes its shape. It no longer nurtures. It instructs. It no longer protects. It tests. You begin to learn resilience not because you are supported, but because you are left with no alternative. You learn silence not as wisdom, but as survival. You learn to read the room before you speak, to measure your words, to calculate the emotional cost of honesty. And though others may call this strength, you know the truth. Strength built in constant tension is not strength freely chosen. It is adaptation under pressure. What makes this realization so difficult is that it carries no clear villain. There are no dramatic scenes to point to, no single act that justifies departure in the eyes of the world. There is only accumulation, a lifetime of small moments where you were unseen, a history of being present without being understood, a long record of emotional labor performed quietly, without recognition. And because nothing looks extreme, you question yourself. You wonder if you are overreacting, if you are ungrateful, if asking for peace is somehow betrayal. Yet the body knows what the mind resists. The exhaustion settles deep, not physical but emotional, the kind that sleep does not cure, the kind that makes you feel older than your years and smaller than your potential. You notice that your joy feels muted in familiar spaces, that your voice grows cautious, that your dreams sound unreasonable when spoken aloud at home. And slowly, painfully, you realize that love should not require you to disappear in order to belong. This keynote is not about blame. It is about clarity. It is about understanding that some families teach you who you must become by showing you who you cannot remain. The lesson is harsh, but it is real. Proximity does not equal safety, and history does not guarantee harmony. Sometimes love exists, but it lacks the tools to be healthy. Sometimes people care deeply, yet are unable to offer respect, emotional accountability, or space for growth. And recognizing this is not cruelty. It is maturity. When love becomes a lesson, the lesson is often this. You are allowed to outgrow environments that cannot grow with you. You are allowed to want peace without negotiation. You are allowed to choose emotional honesty over familiar discomfort. Walking away in this context is not abandonment. It is acknowledgement. It is the quiet acceptance that staying will cost you more than leaving ever could. This realization does not harden you. If anything, it refines you. It teaches discernment. It teaches that love without respect is incomplete and connection without safety is unsustainable. It teaches that dignity is not proven by how much pain you can tolerate, but by how carefully you protect your inner life. And most importantly, it teaches that choosing yourself does not mean you loved others less. It means you finally learned how to love yourself enough to stop bleeding in silence. When love is no longer a home, it becomes a lesson. And lessons, no matter how painful, are meant to be learned, not lived in forever. The quiet cost of staying too long. There is a particular kind of damage that does not announce itself. It does not arrive as conflict or collapse. It settles instead, gently and persistently, into the background of everyday life. This is the cost of staying too long in places where you are tolerated more than you are understood, where your presence is accepted, but your inner world remains unseen. From the outside, everything appears functional. Conversations continue, traditions are maintained, responsibilities are fulfilled, and yet, inside, something essential begins to thin. Not all harm is loud, some of it is patient. At first, staying feels like maturity. You tell yourself that endurance is wisdom, that compromise is proof of emotional strength. You learn to adjust your expectations downward so that disappointment does not hurt as sharply. You become skilled at emotional translation, rephrasing your needs into something more acceptable, more convenient, less disruptive. You postpone difficult truths because peace seems easier than honesty, and for a while this works. The surface remains calm. But calm achieved through self-erasure always comes at a price. The price is subtle. It shows up in the way you hesitate before speaking your mind, in the way you rehearse conversations that never happen, in the way your instincts begin to doubt themselves. You start asking permission for things that require none: rest, privacy, emotional space. You become vigilant, not because danger is constant, but because unpredictability is. You are always adjusting, always anticipating reactions, always managing emotional weather that is not of your making. This constant alertness becomes your normal, and you forget what ease feels like. Over time, this kind of staying reshapes identity. You begin to define yourself not by who you are, but by how well you avoid disruption. Your self-worth becomes linked to usefulness, to compliance, to how little trouble you cause. Praise, when it comes, is often attached to sacrifice. And criticism, when it arrives, feels disproportionate yet strangely familiar. Slowly, the message embeds itself. Harmony matters more than honesty, and your discomfort is less important than collective comfort. What makes this cost so quiet is that it is socially rewarded. Others admire your patience. They call you strong, dependable, mature. They do not see the emotional toll because you have learned to carry it gracefully. You smile, you show up, you perform stability so convincingly that even you begin to believe it. But beneath this performance there is fatigue, not the kind that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from living in partial truth for too long. Staying too long also distorts your sense of responsibility. You begin to feel accountable for emotions that are not yours to manage. You take on the role of stabilizer, mediator, absorber. You believe that if you just explain better, care more, or give less, things will improve. And when they do not, you turn inward. You assume the failure is yours. This internalization is perhaps the most damaging cost of all. It teaches you to doubt your reality. Eventually, the body speaks where words have been silenced. Anxiety without clear cause, a heaviness in familiar spaces, a sense of relief when you are away that feels both freeing and disloyal. You begin to notice that your most authentic self only appears in distance, in quiet, in places where you are not managing anyone else's expectations. And this contrast becomes impossible to ignore. You realize that staying has not preserved peace. It has merely postponed truth. This keynote is about recognizing that longevity is not the same as health. Time spent does not automatically justify continued presence. There is no moral reward for prolonged self-neglect. Staying too long does not make you noble, it makes you tired. And exhaustion, when ignored, does not fade. It hardens into resentment or emptiness. Walking away, then, is not a dramatic act. It is a preventative one. The quiet cost of staying too long is the life you do not live while waiting for permission to be whole. And dignity begins the moment you decide that your inner life deserves the same care you have given to everyone else. Dignity is not loud, it simply leaves. Dignity is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as confrontation, as a final declaration delivered with force and finality. They expect raised voices, dramatic exits, and carefully prepared speeches meant to justify departure. But true dignity rarely behaves this way. It does not seek an audience. It does not need applause. It does not argue its case. Dignity is quiet, controlled, and self-possessed. When it arrives, it does not announce itself. It decides. For a long time, you may have believed that leaving required explanation, that clarity demanded persuasion, that if you could just find the right words, the right tone, the right moment, you would finally be understood. You rehearsed conversations in your mind, imagining a future where honesty would be met with reflection rather than resistance. But experience teaches a harder truth. Some people are not confused. They are committed to misunderstanding. And dignity recognizes when further explanation becomes self-betrayal. This keynote is about the power of restraint, about understanding that not every truth must be spoken aloud to be honored. Silence, when chosen consciously, is not weakness. It is discipline. It is the refusal to reduce your inner clarity into a debate for those unwilling to listen. Dignity does not demand validation. It acts from certainty. And certainty does not need to prove itself. Leaving with dignity means resisting the urge to retaliate. It means stepping away without rewriting history, without exposing every wound, without trying to balance the scales through accusation, not because the pain was small, but because your peace is no longer negotiable. You recognize that emotional energy is finite, and you choose not to spend it on outcomes that cannot change. This is not avoidance, it is prioritization. There is a particular strength in refusing to mirror what harmed you. You do not raise your voice because chaos once did. You do not diminish others because you were once diminished. You do not leave behind bitterness as evidence of your suffering. Instead, you carry yourself with composure, even when misunderstood, even when your silence is misinterpreted. Dignity accepts that being misjudged is sometimes the price of self-respect. Walking away quietly also disrupts expectations. People often anticipate reaction. They are prepared for argument, defense, or emotional display. When none arrives, they are left with their own reflections. Your calm becomes a mirror, and while you may never witness the impact of that mirror, it is not your responsibility to manage how others interpret your absence. Dignity understands that closure is an internal process, not a mutual agreement. This kind of departure requires courage. It demands trust in your own judgment without external confirmation. It asks you to sit with discomfort, the discomfort of unfinished conversations, unanswered questions, and unresolved narratives. But dignity is not concerned with narrative control. It is concerned with inner alignment. You leave not because everything was explained, but because everything became clear. Importantly, leaving with dignity does not mean erasing compassion. You can acknowledge the complexity of others while still choosing distance. You can understand without agreeing. You can care without remaining close. Dignity allows for nuance. It rejects the false choice between anger and submission. It offers a third path, calm disengagement. Over time, you will notice something shift. The energy once spent on managing dynamics returns to you. Your thoughts slow. Your breath deepens. You rediscover parts of yourself that were muted by constant negotiation. This is the reward of quiet departure. Not triumph over others, but reunion with yourself. You begin to realize that peace does not require permission. It requires decision. Dignity is not loud because it does not need to convince. It does not dramatize because it does not doubt. It simply leaves, carrying self-respect forward, without spectacle, without regret, and without turning back to see who noticed. Breaking cycles without becoming bitter. One of the deepest fears that arises when walking away from familiar pain is the fear of transformation in the wrong direction. Not the fear of leaving, but the fear of what leaving might turn you into. You worry that distance will harden you, that self-protection will become coldness, that clarity will curdle into resentment. After all, when pain is inherited and repeated across generations, it leaves behind a quiet warning. Survive this, but do not become it. Breaking cycles requires more than courage. It requires consciousness. Cycles persist not because people intend harm, but because pain left unexamined seeks expression. What was once endured becomes normalized. What was once survived becomes imposed. This is how emotional patterns travel through families, unspoken, unnamed, yet deeply enforced. Roles are passed down, silences are inherited, and before you know it, you are reacting rather than choosing. Breaking this cycle means stepping out of automatic behavior and into deliberate response. It means refusing to let injury dictate identity. Bitterness is often misunderstood as anger. In truth, it is unprocessed grief that has lost its direction. It forms when pain is denied a voice, when experiences are minimized, when suffering is rushed toward forgiveness without understanding. This keynote is not an argument for suppression. It is a call for honesty. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Breaking cycles does not mean pretending the past was gentle. It means facing it without letting it define your future. Choosing not to become bitter is an act of discipline. It is the steady decision to feel fully without acting destructively. You allow sadness to exist without turning it into blame. You permit anger to surface without letting it take control. You grieve what should have been without punishing yourself for wanting it. This emotional literacy is not instinctive. It is learned, often in solitude, often through reflection, and often without guidance. But it is what separates repetition from resolution. There is also a temptation, once awareness dawns, to overcorrect, to build walls instead of boundaries, to replace vulnerability with distance, to confuse independence with isolation. But cycles are not only broken by leaving, they are broken by choosing differently when you stay connected elsewhere, by speaking gently where silence once ruled, by listening where dismissal was common, by offering respect without conditions. You do not need to announce this change. Your consistency will speak for you. Breaking cycles requires patience with imperfection, especially your own. You will sometimes recognize old patterns resurfacing in moments of stress. This does not mean failure. It means you are human. Growth is not the absence of old reflexes. It is the ability to notice them and choose another path. Each conscious decision, no matter how small, weakens the grip of the past. And over time, these choices accumulate into a new way of being. Importantly, breaking cycles does not obligate you to remain close to those who continue them. Compassion does not require proximity. You can wish others well without re-entering harmful dynamics. This distinction is essential. Distance can be an act of care for yourself and for the system you are stepping out of. By refusing to participate, you deny the cycle its fuel. As you move forward, you may notice something unexpected: lightness. Not because the past has vanished, but because it no longer governs your reactions. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than endure. You begin to trust yourself, not because you are untouched by pain, but because you have faced it without letting it shape your character. Breaking cycles without becoming bitter is not about moral superiority. It is about freedom. Freedom from reenactment. Freedom from unconscious loyalty to what hurt you. Freedom to become someone who carries wisdom instead of wounds forward. And that freedom, quietly earned, is one of the most powerful legacies a person can choose to leave behind. Choosing peace, even when it costs familiarity. There comes a moment when familiarity loses its authority, not because it has suddenly become cruel, but because it has quietly stopped being nourishing. Familiar places know your history. They recognize your patterns. They can recite your past without effort. And for a long time, that recognition feels like belonging. But peace asks a different question. one that familiarity often cannot answer. Who are you allowed to become here? When the answer is limited, peace begins to demand distance. Choosing peace is rarely dramatic. It is not an escape fueled by impulse. It is a slow, deliberate recalibration of values. You begin to notice how certain environments affect your nervous system, how your breath shortens, how your guard rises, how your thoughts become careful rather than curious. And you realize that peace is not the absence of people. It is the presence of safety within yourself. When familiarity consistently disrupts that safety, staying becomes a form of self-neglect. The cost of choosing peace is often misunderstood. People assume it is loneliness or loss or regret, but the deeper cost is familiarity itself, the shared language, the unspoken understanding, the ease of not having to explain where you come from. Letting go of this is not simple. It carries grief. You mourn not only what was, but what you hoped it could become. You mourn the version of connection that existed in imagination more than in reality. And this grief deserves respect, not dismissal. Peace does not arrive all at once. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Silence, when you are used to emotional noise, can feel empty. Calm, when you are accustomed to tension, can feel undeserved. You may find yourself reaching back toward old dynamics, not out of desire, but out of habit. This is natural. The nervous system recognizes patterns long before it recognizes freedom. Choosing peace means allowing yourself time to adjust without judgment. This keynote is about redefining loyalty, not as constant presence, but as integrity. You are not disloyal for stepping away from what diminishes you. You are loyal to the version of yourself that deserves rest, clarity, and emotional honesty. Loyalty to self is not selfish, it is foundational. Without it, every other commitment becomes compromised. Peace is the ground from which healthy connection grows, not the reward you earn after enduring discomfort. Choosing peace also means accepting misunderstanding. Not everyone will comprehend your decision. Some will interpret distance as rejection. Others will minimize your reasons because they cannot feel your experience. Dignity here is quiet endurance. You do not need consensus to justify your choice. Peace does not require agreement. It requires alignment. And alignment often looks like solitude before it looks like community. Over time, something remarkable happens. Your internal world stabilizes. Decisions become clearer. Your energy returns in subtle ways. Creativity, patience, curiosity. You become less reactive, not because you are detached, but because you are regulated. The chaos you once navigated no longer defines your baseline, and from this steadiness, you begin to form connections that feel mutual rather than obligatory. Choosing peace does not mean erasing your past or denying your roots. It means carrying them without letting them weigh you down. You can honor where you came from without remaining where you are diminished. Peace allows memory without captivity. It allows compassion without self-sacrifice. And in this balance, you find something more sustainable than familiarity, emotional freedom. In the end, choosing peace is not about escape. It is about arrival into a life where your inner world is no longer in constant negotiation, where calm is not rare, where dignity is not defended but assumed. And even if peace costs familiarity, what it gives in return is something far more valuable, a life lived in quiet alignment with who you truly are.